Hey everyone, Carol here from Oak House Journals. Something a little bit different today. A wee while ago, one of my subscribers spotted this little case. It's a needle case, and it was in the background on one of the videos that formed part of the mini-series on how I put together and my thoughts on my pages for the mini trifold journals. I think it was in the penultimate one when I was talking about how I bind them. And this little journal was on my desk, and she asked if I had a tutorial on how it was made. Well, I've had this little needle case for a good few years, certainly well before I joined YouTube last year. So I didn't and I don't have a tutorial that I could refer her to. But I promised Celia that I would do a video so that she could get a better look at the needle case and give some measurements so that she could go away and make her own. But what I decided to do was do a kind of walkthrough tutorial. Now, unfortunately, I'm having just one issue with my Apple Mac. It's a storage issue, and that prevents me from editing any videos. So the walkthrough stroke tutorial will probably be in a couple of parts, and I'll nip off between each to do things like piecing the fabric together and or sewing them in place. Okay, so let's get started. I mean, this is a great little project. It can be as simple or as time consuming. I won't say difficult because it's certainly not a difficult project, but it can be as quick or as time consuming as you want to make it. For example, this little one here, as you can see, is stitched. You don't have to stitch it. There are some fabric glues around at the moment that are really good. Obviously, we all seem to know about the Beacon 3-in-1 and the Fabri-Tac. There are other fabric glues on the market, and they are fabulous, so they will do the trick, although I think stitching really is the better option. So what do? You could machine stitch, but if you're not a great lover of machine stitching, you could certainly slow stitch this. And with the projects on the go at the moment, the Sew for the Soul projects, this would also be a fabulous project if you, for example, wanted to slow stitch on the cover before you actually construct it and make it into a needle case. So there are oodles and oodles of options there. If you didn't want to, for example, turn in all your edges, I haven't on this one, as you can see. I mean, this little case has been around for years. She gets used every time I bind a journal because all my bookbinding needles and threads are in here. And she's lasted really well. So don't be shy if you don't want to turn your edges in when you do your fabric piecing. It's not an issue at all. That's the quick way to do it. The more time-consuming way is to turn a hem on all these pieces before you stitch them in place. You can use up your individual scraps, or you can use one continuous piece, and I'll explain that, what I mean by that, in more detail in a moment with you. Sorry, she is fraying now, bless her. As I say, she has seen better days. She's been around for absolutely ages. But one caveat to this walkthrough tutorial is I don't do and have never made a quilt. I'm not a quilter. I do sew, I do embroidery. I love having a go at soft furnishings and upholstery work, but I've never done patchwork or quilting. So there may well be much better options out there for how I'm going to show you how to make this. This is just my take, and this is just what I made. So please excuse me if you're an experienced hack at all of this. As I say, this is just my take. So let's look at the case in more detail. This is what she looks like. I'll flip over. So that's the cover. Let's get her in frame for you. Sorry about that. I'm going to move this mat over. I will take this mat away in a moment or two. But as you can see, she is just fabric pieces that I have pieced together and machine stitched. And then on the inside, I have just backed it all with a piece of felt and flipped it over. And the double stitching all the way around the edge is I stitched all the way around the cover first when I made it and when I created this pocket here, and then I just stitched my felt inner to it. So really, really easy. And as I said, I keep all my bookbinding threads, wax threads in there, and these are the needles that I use, and just a super easy, simple construction. Stitch down the middle there for those pieces of felt. You can close her in one or two ways. You can close her that way and flip this over if you want to. I don't tend to do that because I don't like the look. I tend to just close it up like so, which keeps my needles nicely together, and just close her up that way. She's got a button on the front and a cord that I just wrap round, secured with a couple of handmade beads. So really, really simple construction. So Celia, right, dimensions and measurements for you. Okay, so she is 12 centimeters wide here by 25 centimeters, and this little bit here, the folded up pocket, measures 6 centimeters. So in total, 25 centimeters, 6 centimeters is your fold for your pocket, and 12 centimeters is your width. Now, for us that like to work in inches, she is 5 inches wide by, this is roughly 2¼ inches there. So I would say 5 by 9, 5 by 9¼ I mean, it doesn't matter if you use that quarter or not. It's however deep you want your pocket. So I really worked on the basis that she's 5 by 9, just for ease. So the first thing you want to do is to cut a piece of felt the size that your needle case is going to be. So 5 by 9 if you're working in inches, 12 centimeters by 25 centimeters. Now, this is a great little project if you want to use up your scraps. I've lifted out, let me first off show you. This is the felt that I have from previous projects. In fact, most of it is from a Christmas make that I made for one of my Christmas makes last year. So this is what I have left over. I haven't gone out and bought any extra. I just wanted to use what I'd got. And luckily I had a piece that is this very soft beigey colour. I would have liked to have gone with something like this, which was the slightly off-white, but I didn't have enough. So this is my piece of felt. That is the size of my needle case. And then I cut 2 additional pieces that were 11 centimeters by 10 centimeters, or 4.25 inches by 3.75 inches. And again, you don't need to be precise with those measurements. Just make sure that they are smaller than your base piece of felt, and small enough so that when you stitch your cover to your front cover, your inside to your front cover, that you are not going to catch these pieces, because these pieces will already be stitched in to your inside cover by the time you come to do that. So you want to make sure that they're slightly shorter at both top and bottom and on this edge, so that you're not going to catch them when you stitch your covers together. or your inside to your outside. Now I'm going to be slightly different when I do mine because I just had this little tiny piece of this felt left over. I didn't have enough to do these pieces, the needle pieces, out of this felt. So I've had to resort to using the off-white, which goes well with what I want to do, but I still want to marry it in a little bit better. So I'm going to be adding just that tiny little piece in there for no other reason than I like it. Now, if you wanted to do more than 2 pieces of felt inside, then go for your life. But what I would suggest is don't do too many. Maybe do a third if you want to. And certainly I wouldn't go to a third if your felt is thick. Mine is, as you can see, very, very thin. But you don't need thick felt at all. It doesn't have to be natural wool felt, as I call it. You can get synthetic felts in craft shops these days. That'll work equally as well. Just anything that you can basically poke your needle through. Okay, so as I say, cut your base or your inside piece, your long piece, and then cut yourself 2 or 3, depending on your personal preference, of these little pieces to go inside, and then just pop it to one side. We will deal with those later. Okay, so now in terms of what you use for your front cover, I find it best when I'm fabric piecing to work on a base to put my pieces on. Now that base can be anything, absolutely anything. And here I've got some examples. This is just some linen from my stash, and I use this when I'm stamping and I want to make stamped fabric labels or tabs for my journals. This is absolutely perfect stuff, but you don't need to use this. Whatever you use is not going to be seen at all, or not for the way I do it. I nearly use this, and this is just a piece of an old pillowcase left over that I have in my stash from years ago. It's absolutely lovely, lovely soft cotton, and I use it quite a lot in my journals for all sorts of things, including the bits. Sorry about that. So this would have worked equally as well. Or if you have some old curtain lining, absolutely anything you could use. I mean, this is some old, well, it's not old, it's a leftover piece of some curtain lining that I have in my stash, and equally that would have worked just as well. If you have an old table linen table napkin or piece of a tablecloth, anything like that, this is why this is a great project for stash busting. You could even use floral fabrics or pattern fabrics if you have those and a big enough piece, just so long as whatever you fabric piece on top is not going to show through what's underneath. So as I say, for your base piece for this top cover, you can use anything. And what I used for mine was actually this, which was, as I said, the linen that I use for my fabric tabs. Now, there's several ways that you can do your top cover. Now, if you want to leave your edges raw, that's absolutely fine. But it will dictate how big your base piece will be for the front cover. Now, if you're leaving your edges raw, the base piece, I would suggest, needs to be either the same size as your felt piece, this piece, or just marginally bigger, so that when you've put all your pieces on, you can trim it down to size. Okay, now this is I've got a couple here of works in progress that I thought I would bring into view for you. Now, as you can see on this one, I'm going to flip it over. There's my base piece, and this one is just a torn piece. It is slightly bigger than my inside felt piece, which I'm going to bring in now. As you can see, it's slightly bigger. Okay. Now, if you, as I say, are going to leave your edges raw, and here I've partially done it so that you can see what I'm referring to. If you are going to leave, sorry about that, I'm off screen. If you're going to leave your edges raw, then when you put your scraps on top, then just line them up with your base piece so that when you come to sew your felt piece in place, you can match it up perfectly with the edge and have that organic frayed edge look to it. The other option is that if your base piece here is slightly bigger than your felt piece, what you can do in that instance is put your felt piece in place when you have put all your fabric pieces on top and secured them in place, and then before you actually after you've stitched it together, you can chop it off so it's perfect. So you have a choice really of how you do that. You can either cut your base piece and line up all your pieces so that they exactly meet the edges, and then marry it up with your felt and then stitch it all together. Or you can, as I say, have your base piece marginally bigger than your felt piece. When you've connected all these pieces together and stitched them in place, and then stitched your felt in place, you can trim it round the edge after it's been stitched. So you have a choice if that's what you want to do, if you leave your edges raw. And that is exactly what I did on this one. I stitched all my pieces onto my base piece, which was actually larger than my felt piece. I then stitched my felt piece to my cover and then trimmed it off. And that was the look that I got on this one. And it's worked quite well. But you have another option. You can actually fold in all your edges of your pieces when you are laying them onto your base piece. Now, if you're going to do that, you need to make sure that your base piece that you are working to is the exact size of your felt piece, because you're not going to have any option to trim it down after you've stitched it in place. So with mine, as you can see here, I have started to turn over my edges at the top. And when I stitch all my pieces in place, then that piece will go on the top like so and give me a nice turned in edge like that. So the choice is yours really. It depends whether you want to spend the time turning your edges in and get what I think is a neater look, or you want to leave them rough, let's move that up, rough edged like so, and just trim it down when you stitched it to your backing piece of felt. Now I hope that wasn't too garbled and you managed to follow that okay. What I was going to discuss with you now is, as you can see with this one, I've used a lot of scraps, and I have just pinned them for the time being to my base piece down here. And what what design you choose is entirely up to you. The only thing I would say to you is bear in mind which edge you are going to use as your pocket. So for me, this is going to be the edge that I use for my pocket. Okay. Now, on this particular piece that I've prepared, as you can see, I've turned in my edges along here and started to do it up there. On these pieces as well, I've turned in my edges, but on this one I haven't. Now, partly the reason that I've turned my edges in is because this fabric here, here, and here are all kind of a wide weave fabric, and it will fray even if I stitch the edges. Now that's absolutely fine. I don't mind that at all, but I prefer a knee to finish now, or I'm going for a knee to finish on this occasion. Now I've turned in my edge here, but not along this edge here. Now this fabric and this fabric are a lot finer and they're less likely to fray. Also, that is the only amount of this fabric that I had, and I chopped it in 2 pieces, so I haven't got a lot, and I didn't really want to lose the overall look by turning in a little hem on either of these 2 edges. So that is what I've done on this one, and this one, what I've done is I've used scraps of fabric. Now let me just quickly cover with you what fabric you can use. But the bottom line is you can use any fabric. You can use any scraps at all. So I've got some examples here of some fabric that I have used. This is some old Liberty, well, it's not old, it's stuff that I've not used. This is Liberty print fabric, so it's a nice fine cotton, lovely to use. This, let me get that one out of the way. What I wanted to do was have a nice mix of plain and patterned fabric so that it wasn't too busy. The whole fact that you are fabric piecing, if you will, means that it's going to look quite busy, which is lovely, but I do think it needs to be broken up in sections by some plain fabric, and I didn't have enough of that. I didn't have much. What I do have though is silk fabric or silk chiffon fabric, which is plain, and that's what I've used here. And I also used this, which is some silk. This is part of an old shirt, which, as you can see, I've used along there, and I've used it because it's got like a textured finish to it, and all I did was flip it over and put some hems on it, and this is a piece of what it originally looked like. So you can use old shirts if you want, or dress fabric. This is some vintage fabric that I have in my stash. This would have been ideal to use, and these are all just actual samples that upholstery fabric samples that I got and that I use for my journals. So I just chopped up a few portions or a few pieces of that to use. This is another piece that I was actually considering using because of the colour match. So you can use whatever you like, and as you saw earlier, there's also a piece of broderie anglais lace that I'm using in this one. So you can use any old scraps. They don't have to, it doesn't have to be new. It can be repurposed or recycled fabrics from curtaining or clothes. So the choice is yours. And also the other good thing about this is when you have tiny little bits of scraps left over, such as I have here, this is just an edge piece, then don't throw these away, because you obviously can ruche them up and pass them through your sewing machine and make ruffles out of them for your journals, or you can use them as ties and ribbons, or snippets, use them in snippet rolls. In fact, I've got a couple of these pieces tucked away ready for when I do my next snippet roll as part of the Sew for the Soul project. So again, you can use all your scraps. Don't throw them away. Don't throw them away. So this is an example of where I have used lots of little pieces and arranged them as I wanted on my base piece, and I've pinned them in place as I want them to look. And now I will take them away and I will stitch them in place. This piece of broderie anglais is going to go along that edge there, so that I have a duplicate or a matching piece on the other side. So that is one way to do your arrange your fabrics on your base piece. Another way, which I have to say I found an awful lot easier and quicker, was this way. And what I did here, let me just pop that pin in. What I did here was, if I flip it over, here's my base piece, and this piece is slightly bigger than my felt, but it won't be by the time I've turned my edges over. So I will go for a neat edge finish on this rather than this edge, which is the frayed edge look. So what I did was I cut my base piece for the front cover slightly bigger than my felt piece. Then I took a piece of fabric, which was this one. Get that back in frame for you. Took a piece, I'm just going to raise this up a little bit so that I can get both edges in shot for you. There we go, sorry about that. So then I cut a piece of fabric that I wanted to show on my front cover, the same size as my base piece, which, as I said, is slightly larger than my felt. And then what I did was I got various pieces and layered them on top. And really, this is a very simple layout on this one. The other one ended up being a lot more complicated and time consuming. So all I did was I put a strip here and then two strips here, and one is overlapping the other. And then what I did was I got various other pieces and I've just turned them over so that they have little hems and arranged them on top. Whereas with this one, these are all individual pieces. So it's easier actually to work with one big piece underneath showing through and arrange on top, rather than to work with individual little pieces and try and cover up your base bit. And I hope that makes sense. But what I found was this was a lot more easy, a lot easier, I'm trying to say, to work with than this way. Okay, so I'm going to leave you now, and what I will do is I am going to take both of my front covers away and I am going to stitch round them, and I'm going to prepare them for stitching onto my felt insides. Now, this is the piece of felt that I have chosen to go with this one, and as I said, it's not ideal. I would have preferred the ivory, which is what I'm using for my needle parts, but I didn't want to go out and buy some or ordering online actually some felt. So I'm working with what I have here, and as I say, it's not ideal, but I'm going with that option. For this one, I now have a bit of a dilemma, because I could go with the blue inside and try and pick up these bits of blue, and there is some blue on this, or I could go with the green, so that and the green will hopefully pick out the olive green here. So the jury is out at the moment on which I choose, but by the time I come back with the second part of this little walkthrough tutorial, you'll have seen I will have made a decision. All right, everybody. So as I say, I will be back in part 2 with when I've stitched all these together and have the front cover ready for stitching to the inside felt. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, leave them in the description box down below, and I'll try and get back to you and answer those ASAP. And also, if you're confused, I'll try and clarify in the next video what I was talking about, if I've managed to baffle you completely. All right, everybody, have a lovely day. Hope you're all staying fit and well and healthy, and most important, happy. Bye-bye for now.